Hello everyone, I'm Neelam Avasthi, PGT History from KV1 Kolaba, Mumbai. Students, today I'm going to give you the lecture of Kings, Farmers and Towns. That is the second theme of your textbook. The chapter basically deals with all these points. 8 points are there. Prinsep and Piyadasi has been explained. John Prinsep, who has explained the word Piyadasi, which was used for the ruler, we will discuss later on. The earliest states, in the beginning, the new states developed. Those were the Mahajanapadas, and then an early empire, that was the Magadha, which developed. The fourth point is the new notions of the kingship, in which when Magadha developed as a new state, then there were the new concepts of the kingship have been discussed here. A changing countryside, it is quite obvious when there were a number of changes, then the countryside and the changes were there in the society also. Then at that time when the trade developed, the towns also developed, trading towns developed. And the seventh point deals with the back to basics. Here, how the inscriptions are deciphered has been described, and what were the limitations of the inscriptional evidences, that has been described. There are several changes in economic and the political life between 600 BCE to 600 CE. During this period, the Rig Veda was composed by people living along the Indus and its tributaries. And the most important was the emergence, and new states emerged during that time. As I said, the political life changed. The most important was the emergence of the early states, emergence of new kingdoms. There were other changes as well, as like growth in the agricultural production, emergence of new towns. Historians have tried to understand these changes by using a variety of sources. What all sources have been explained here? These sources are inscriptions, texts, coins. Coins are major sources which have been explained here. Uh, there are a number of sources to understand early Indian history. Historians attempt to understand early Indian history by drawing on a range of sources. Okay, so some developments, there are a few developments of 1500 years following the end of the Harappan civilization. After this civilization, as I said, Rig Veda was composed. Along the Indus and its tributaries, agricultural settlements emerged in many parts of the subcontinent. Emergence of new mode of disposal of the dead like megaliths in central and south India has been noticed. Then emergence of new towns and kingdoms. It is a very important aspect of this time. Uh, One concept has been discussed in the first point of your book, first subheading. In 1830, James Prinsep, he was an officer in the East India Company's mint, deciphered Brahmi and Kharoshthi, and then he came with the concept. He found that most of most of these mentioned a king referred to as Piyadasi, meaning the pleasant to behold. There were a few inscriptions which also referred to the king Ashoka, one of the most famous rulers known from the Buddhist text. This is Brahmi, which was deciphered. Two scripts, Brahmi and Kharoshthi, were deciphered. Now, next in the 6th century BCE, that is known as a turning point in the Indian history, when two religions developed. Rise of the two new religions have been noticed, Jainism and Buddhism. There was a lot of use of iron and development of coinage, and early states and cities developed that time. So when early states developed, these were 16 Mahajanapadas. Here the map shows you different Mahajanapadas, right? These are the Mahajanapadas: Avanti, Matsya, Surasena, Kuru, Panchal, Kosal. These were the 16 Mahajanapadas, and that gave entirely different shape and change to the society. Then we need to notice what were the features of Mahajanapadas. The 6th century, probably 6th century BC is known for the rise of the 16 Mahajanapadas, and the features of the Mahajanapadas were, most Mahajanapadas were ruled by the kings, some were oligarchies. Uh, these states were ruled by the kings or the Ganas, oligarchies. Each had its own capital, often fortified. The capitals were mostly fortified for the safety and security. Some states maintained permanent standing armies too. Dharma Sutra laid down norms for the kings and other people. Functions of the rulers were to collect taxes and tribute from the people. First amongst the 16, one subheading is there in a book. Which one was the first among the 16? That was Magadha. The question is, how did Magadha become the most powerful Mahajanapada? There are some reasons due to which some become very powerful, and it was Magadha which became powerful. Number one, it had powerful and ambitious rulers, Bimbisara, Ajatasattu, then Mahapadmananda, Ghanananda, the Nanda dynasty rulers were very ambitious. So their ministers who helped to implement their policies, that also laid a lot of impact on becoming that area as first amongst the others. Okay, then availability of elephants. Sundarban Delta was nearby, so Sundarbans gave good elephants from the forest, and important which constituted an important part of the army. Then that was the plain area, and it had very fertile soil. The soil was alluvial and very good for the agriculture purposes, and very productive soil. Ganga and its tributaries provided means of cheap transport and convenient communication. That also was another cause of the rise of Magadha as first amongst the all 16 Mahajanapadas. And location of Pataliputra, the actual capital of Magadha, was very good. It was facilitated, it had facilitated routes of communication, and Rajgriha, the old capital of Magadha, was also located amongst the hills. So the scenic beauty was also there. Availability of iron enabled the Magadhas to make tools and weapons. That area was very rich in the minerals and the iron ore, so that gave a boost to become a great empire. Now we have, at the same time, after Magadha, an early empire. When we talk about the early empire, Mauryan Empire came to be known as the greatest empire of those times. Now there is a difference between an early state, an early great state, and the empire. Okay, there is a difference. The rise of Magadha culminated in the emergence of the Mauryan Empire. How it came to the scene. The rise of Magadha culminated in the emergence of the Mauryan Empire. Chandragupta Maurya in 321 BCE was the founder, and he was supported by, he was guided by, it is known to everyone, by Chanakya, Kautilya. So he, and later on his grandson Asoka, the most famous ruler, conquered Kalinga too. So this was the extent of the Mauryan Empire from 321 BCE to 185 BCE. Here the establishment of what all the resources, those are there in your book. You need to read, you need to study. So the literary sources, the establishment has been shown here. Chandragupta Maurya in 321 and 22, then fought with the Nanda dynasty, and Megasthenes Indica, then Kautilya's Arthashastra. Different sources are there. Jataka, Vajika, Buddhist text, and Vishakadatta and Barbara Hills. These were the main sources of knowing about the Mauryan Empire. Uh, of course, Buddhist, Jaina, and Puranic literature, as well as literature in Sanskrit written by the Mauryans, the inscriptions of Asoka from probably circa 272 to 268 are the main sources of knowing the Mauryan Empire. Then finding about the Maurya sources to reconstruct the history of the Mauryan Empire. How do we reconstruct the history of Mauryan Empire? From the archaeological finds, we come to know about the Mauryan Empire, the sculptures of Ashoka's inscriptions. Then literary sources like Indica accounts of Megasthenes, Arthashastras, Kautilya that I already have discussed. One important change, one important point which we need to discuss here, that Ashoka established Dhamma. He followed after during the battle of Kalinga only, near the river Daya. He decided to give up the war and follow the path of Dhamma, walk on the path of Dhamma. So Ashoka's inscription tells us, they proclaim what he understood to be Dhamma, which includes respect towards elders, generosity towards Brahmanas, and those who renounced worldly life, treating slaves and servants kindly, and respect for religions and traditions other than owns one. According to him, this would ensure the well-being of people in this world, special officers known as Dhamma Mahamatta, which is given in your book. Dhamma Mahamatta was the officer who used to look after the spread of the Dhamma, the Buddhism. Then administering the empire. There were 5 major political centers. Okay, and features of the Mauryan administration have been mentioned here. They are basically explained, written in the Ashokan inscriptions, as I have written. King enjoyed the absolute power. From these inscriptions only we come to know what kind of administration was there. The center of the great administrative system. The vast empire was divided into number of provinces. The Mauryans had a strong standing army. Then 5 major political centers were there: Pataliputra, Takshashila, Ujjaini, Toshila, Suvarnagiri, and to administer the vast empire. These centers were situated on important long-distance trade routes. Communication along both land and riverine routes was vital for the existence of the empire. Administering the empire, again 3.2, features of the Mauryan administration as mentioned in the Ashokan inscriptions. Role of the subcommittees. Subcommittees were very important component of the Mauryan empire. Megasthenes has mentioned there are about 6 committees organized for coordinating military activity. They looked after the navy, transport, infantry, cavalry, chariots, and elephants. The second committee was to arrange bullock carts to carry equipments, procure food for soldiers and fodder. That was the supply line sort of a committee for animals, and recruit servants and artisans to look after the soldiers. How important was the empire? In this particular subheading, the thing has been described that it lasted for about 150 years. The Mauryan Empire was not so important in Indian history because the Mauryan Empire ruled India for about 150 years, not much time in the vast span of the history of the subcontinent. But it extended control as far north, west as Afghanistan, right? And Baluchistan and south up to the Andhra Pradesh, right? Earlier also I showed one map. You will notice that the empire did not encompass the entire subcontinent, and even within the frontiers of the empire, control was not uniform. By the 2nd century BCE, new chiefdoms and kingdoms emerged in several parts of the subcontinent. Now we talk about the new notions of the kingship, chiefs and kings in the south. We were talking about the north, we were talking about of course, not only the north but the whole India, but in the deep south, there were few new developments. By the 2nd century BCE, new chiefdoms and kingdoms emerged in several parts of India. Like in South India, Cholas, Cheras, Pandyas proved to be stable and prosperous under the control of chiefs who performed special rituals and leadership. These were known as Tamilakam from some Sangam texts. Several states, including Satavahanas and Shakas, took advantage from long distance trade. Kushana's 1st century BC to 1st century CE ruled over a vast kingdom extending from Central Asia to the northwest India. Their history has been reconstructed from the inscriptions, from the coins, and the sculptures we have found. And the kings were, I would like to explain you a bit. The kings were called as the many kings, including the Satavahanas. They were called as the Devaputtas, or the colossal status of Kushana rulers were found installed in a shrine at Mat near Mathura. Some historians feel that the Kushanas considered themselves gold-like, so they were called as son of God, or the Devaputra. That will be explained later on the other slides. Because divine king, the notion of divine king was there at that time, and the kingship they wanted to convey as well reflect in their coins and sculpture. Huge status of Kushan rulers have been found in UP and Afghanistan. This indicates that the Kushana considered themselves godlike. Okay, as already I have said that Devaputra and son of God, two words have been mentioned here. Then source of post-Mauryan period history of Gupta's 4th century CE has been reconstructed from literatures, from coins and inscriptions. Again the same kind of sources, literary sources, very important. Then the coin, numismatics is an important source where from we come to know about the rulers and the inscriptions prepared by them. Then the prashastis, the Prayaga Prashasti, Allahabad pillar inscriptions composed by Harisena, the court poet of the Samudragupta. The 5th point in your textbook is a changing countryside, popular perceptions of king. Ordinary people rarely left accounts of their thoughts and experiences. Historians have tried to solve the problem by examining stories contained in anthologies such as the Jatakas and the Panchatantras. Many of these stories probably originated as popular oral tales and were later committed to writing. The Jatakas were written in Pali around the middle of the 1st millennium. One story known as Gandai Tindu Jataka describes the plight of the subjects of wicked king. These include elderly women and men, cultivators, herders, village boys, and even animals. When the kings went in disguise to find out what his subjects thought about him, each one of them cursed him for their miseries, explaining that they were attacked by robbers at night and by tax collectors during the day. To escape from this situation, people abandoned their village and went to live in the forest. As this story indicates the relationship between a king and his subjects, especially the rural population, so many a times it happened that the people were not having very good relations with the rulers. Now, strategies for increasing agricultural production: use of iron-tipped plough, introduction of transplantation of paddy, irrigation through wells, tanks, and canals, hoe, agriculture in semi-arid parts of Punjab, Rajasthan, and hilly tracts in northeastern and central parts. So, agricultural production and strategies also changed, and they went to the level of little advancement. Difference in the rural society. What differences were found in the rural society? There was a growing differentiation amongst people engaged in agriculture. They were based on differential access to land, labor, and some of the new technologies. With the increase in production, differences arose among people engaged in agriculture. Buddhist tradition refers to landless agricultural laborers, small peasants, and the large landlords. Landlords and heads of the village were more powerful and had control over farmers. This is quite obvious in all the societies. This has been noticed. People, those who have got more lands or those who have got big lands, they played an important role in the society. So in South India, Sangam texts, this has been mentioned in the Sangam text, that big landowners or the large landowners were called as velelars, plowmen were called as uzevars, and the slaves were called as adamai. Large landowners were the velelars, plowmen were the uzevars, and the slaves were called as adamais. Thus, differences in rural society were based on control over land, labor, and technologies. Land grants and new rural elites. That this was another development in the society. Land grants by kings were recorded in inscriptions. Most of the records are generally about grants to religious institutions or brahmanas. Prabhavati Gupta, daughter of Chandragupta II, was married into the family of Vakatakas in Deccan. According to Sanskrit legal texts, women were not supposed to have access to land, but inscriptions indicate that Prabhavati had access to land. That means women were not given access to land. The term Gahabati has been used, which is in the Pali text to designate the second and the third categories. The large landholders as well as the village headmen, whose position was often hereditary, emerged as powerful figures and often exercised control over other cultivators. Okay, large landowners who were there, they were the velelars. Okay, early Tamil literature, the Sangam text also mentions different categories of the people living in the villages that I explained you. These differences were based on differential access to land, labor, and some of them new technologies. In such situations, questions of control over land must have become crucial, as these were often discussed in legal texts. The inscription gave us an idea about the rural people, brahmanas, peasants, and others. Differences were there in the society. Large differences were there in the society that we can easily notice. There were regional variations. Land grants were made to extend agriculture to new areas or to win allies by making grants of land. Land grants provided an insight into the leadership between peasants, relationship between peasants and the state. However, groups such as pastoralists, fisher folk, hunter-gatherers, sedentary artisans, and shifting cultivators did not keep detailed records of their lives and transactions. Now, land grants and new rural elites. They also developed land grants. Copper plates have excavated maybe a symbol certifying the details of the land. Prabhavati Gupta, daughter of Chandragupta, married in Vakataka. Legal texts suggest that women did not have independent access to resources such as land, but evidences have been found that they had been granted land. Then, strategy to increase agriculture area, win allies, used to strengthen political power, to project themselves as supermen. They are superior, have some authority. Now, we will talk about the towns, trade and towns, the development of new cities. Major towns were located along routes of communication. That is quite obvious. Wherever there is a route of communication, wherever there is a route of transport, there only the towns will develop, such as Pataliputra were on riverine routes. Pataliputra means present day Patna or nearby areas. So Ganges was there. So that was a major means of transport and communication. Some were near the coast, from where sea route began. Many cities like Mathura were bustling centers of commercial, cultural, and political activities. Then urban population, what they did, elites and the craft persons. Of course, in cities, different types of goods and services and their production as well as their trade starts. here also we see that a wide range of artifacts have been recovered from the excavations in these areas, which prove that a great deal of handicrafts and the crafts persons were there, those who prepared that, those who manufactured that. These include fine pottery, bowls, dishes with a glossy finish known as Nadan black, polished ware probably used by rich people, and ornaments, tools, weapons, vessels, figurines made of wide range of materials: gold, silver, copper, bronze, ivory, glass, shell, and terracotta. By the 2nd century BCE, we find short motive inscriptions in number of cities, sometimes guilds or shrines. Shrenis organizations means these were the sections. Shrenis were the sections of different types of artisans and merchants are mentioned. From the 6th century BCE, land and river routes crisscrossed the subcontinent and extended in various directions. Rulers often attempted to control the routes, possibly by offering protection for a price. Those who traversed these routes include peddlers who probably traveled on foot and merchants who traveled with caravans of bullock carts and pack animals. So this was some important kingdoms and the towns of that time, some important kingdoms which is given in our textbook. Towns and trade in the subcontinent and beyond, how the trade was carried out. Species Spices, especially pepper, were in high demand in the Roman Empire, as were textiles and medicinal plants, and these were all transported across the Arabian Sea to the Mediterranean. Exchanges were facilitated by the introduction of coinage. Punch-marked coins made of silver and copper were amongst the earliest to be minted and used. Attempts were made to identify the symbols on punch-marked coins and specific ruling dynasties. The first coins to bear the names and the images of the rulers were issued by the Indo-Greek, who established control over the northwestern part of the subcontinent, 2nd century BCE. Then, very important part, that the rulers are known by the quality of their coins. The first gold coins were issued circa 1st century CE, Christian era, by Kushanas. The widespread use of gold coins indicated the enormous value of the transactions that were taking place. Some of the most spectacular gold coins were issued by the Gupta rulers from circa 6th century CE onwards. Find of gold coins, Taparov coins were also issued by the tribal republics such as that of the Yaudheya of Punjab and Haryana. Hoards of Roman coins have been found from archaeological sites in South India. It is obvious that the networks of the trade that came from the trade only were not confined within the political boundaries. Such South India was not part of the Roman Empire, but there were close connections through trade. Exchanges were facilitated by the introduction of the coinage. Punch-marked coins made of silver and copper were amongst the earliest to be minted and used. Coins were issued by kings, merchants, bankers, and town people. The first coins bearing the names and the image of the rulers were issued by the Indo-Greeks. So this is the way how we had connections with numismatics is one important area. Coins are the important area. The founds of the coin tells us that Indians had very good connectivity with the other empires. These were virtually identical in the weights. The first gold coins were issued in the 1st century CE by Kushanas, as already I told you. And some of the most spectacular gold coins were issued by the Gupta rulers also, and coins issued by the kings, merchants, bankers, and town people. The first coins bearing the names and the images of the rulers were issued by the Indo-Greeks. So, to present themselves as the superior need to be worshipped, first claimed by Kushanas in 1st century CE, claiming to be Devaputra. I already explained you. James Princeps now, the concept of Piyadasi. James Prinsep, an officer in the Mint of the English East India Company, who has explained about, who has deciphered Brahmi and Kharoshthi. Ashokan Brahmi in 1838. The coin of Indo-Greek kings contained the names of kings written Greek and Kharoshthi scripts. The European scholars compared the letters in both scripts. For example, symbol for A could be found in both scripts for writing names such as Apollodotus. So this is the way how the inscriptions were deciphered. It is found that the name of Asoka is not mentioned in the inscriptions. So instead of the king is referred as the Devanapiya or the Piyadasi, as I was telling about James Prinsep. He was an officer in the Mint of East India Company. He deciphered, and then it was detected that Devanapiya, beloved of the god, or Piyadasi, pleasant to behold, has been used for Ashoka, because the inscriptions which have been found, they belong to that particular period. There were a few inscriptions which also refer to the king as Ashoka. These inscriptions are also containing such titles. By examining the content, style, language, and paleography of these inscriptions, epigraphists have come to the conclusion that they were issued by the same ruler. Now, the last point, 8th point, is the limitation of the inscriptional evidences. What are the limitations of the inscriptional evidences? Number one, letters may be very faintly engraved. They were engraved, but during the course of the time, they are now faintly engraved. It is very difficult to read them, to come to a conclusion what is written there. Then inscriptions may be damaged, or the letters are missing. They are damaged, because of that the letters are missing, so it is very difficult to read them, to make proper sentences, to come to a conclusion what is written. It is not sure about the exact meaning of the words. Then inscriptions may not have lasted the ravages of time. Thus, what is available at present is simply a fraction of what was written. Inscriptions may not provide a complete idea about the political and economic history. That also is one another important point. Then the inscriptions were written from the point of the view of the person who commissioned them. It is lopsided, one-sided. The ruler, one who was there, they have been written for the ruler only. So the common people are not the part of those inscriptions. So the routine agricultural practice may not be recorded in the inscriptions. That means that the common people has not been discussed. So this was all about this chapter. There are 8 points, and it is not very difficult to prepare. Some few questions are there that I'll be telling you in the next video.